Yeah, we've been at this for about 3 years now, but as Claire mentioned, my background is, I have a tech background, but I do come from 3 generations of cattle ranchers on my mom's side of the family. So as a kid, I worked on the ranch. And so the sustainability efforts that we've seen, to me, it's the way that my grandfather ran his ranch. Regen Ag looks a lot like what I grew up with as a kid. Hang on a second. Oh, yeah, down, sorry. Down rather than up, all right. And as Claire mentioned, the key unlock here is how do you pay for all this stuff? I've noted the same thing that I think Claire mentioned, which is most of these presentations end with how do we get widespread adoption at the producer level, and then how do we pay for it and how do we fund it? How do we really drive this market? And one of the things that's unique about animal agriculture is that it's an incredibly diverse supply chain, literally hundreds of thousands of producers. And if you really want to make an impact on the climate, you have to drive widespread adoption. And that was really the thesis behind the creation of Athian. And it's no secret why we're here. Companies at the end of the value chain have made commitments to cut their footprints. But more importantly, consumers have expressed interest in products that are sustainably raised. I was fascinated by the discussions around looking at what their willingness to pay actually is. But it's pretty clear that companies have made long-term commitments here. And I think when companies like large consumer packaged goods companies, when they made these commitments, they may or may not have fully understood where their footprint actually existed. But it turns out that if you're General Mills, roughly 90% of your carbon footprint is in your supply chain. So it's all scope 3. And in most cases, those commodities are outside of the immediate control of those companies at the end of the value chain. So the question is, if they want to meet their goals, how do they incentivize and drive that change that's required? And historically, the way we solved this problem is with carbon offset marketplaces. They've been with us for about 30 years, and essentially, a company like Delta Airlines can pay a farmer in the Amazon to reforest an acre of ground, and because the climate's a closed-loop system, it's going to suck carbon out of the atmosphere, and Delta will pay for that. And they can continue to pollute in the ways that they were, that's inherent in air travel. Carbon insetting, by contrast, is a relatively new concept, but essentially it's driving true long-term systemic change by changing the processes themselves to reduce or avoid the methane in the first place. And Athian exists to facilitate those projects and that process, and I'll talk briefly about how that works. Essentially, we've built a software platform, and this is not a commercial for Athian necessarily, but to facilitate this change, we've built a software platform that connects all of the steps in the value chain. So we start with a view for the producer where they can, essentially, I think Juan Tricarico mentioned this, ultimately a producer needs to be able to look at all the interventions that are available to them, be able to do a quick ROI analysis, and then make an informed decision about what makes sense for their operations. So we start with the producer. They have a view to our software, and we deliver just that. We pull data from their on-farm systems, provide them with alternatives, and then we're driven by protocols that are built for specific interventions, whether those are initially were feed additives, manure management. We're now moving into genetics, into overall efficiency as well. But those protocols are essentially repeatable recipes that they can follow to implement these practice changes. We then hire a third party that comes in and verifies their progress and validates what's taking place on farm, that they've followed the protocols. And then the end of the value chain purchases metric tons of reduction that are tied directly to their supply chain. So the deliverable there is an asset that's fully auditable, it will withstand third-party scrutiny, and that will provide them with all of the data required to make a legitimate claim against their science-based targets. Oh, well, that may be all my slides. The bottom line for our company is that we are driven by a couple of key factors, which is if you really want to make an impact, you have to provide a mechanism by which you drive practice change at the producer level. And these commodity-based markets, the farmers in our supply chains, they're price takers, not price makers. And so they can't bear the responsibility to fund all of these practices. So our platform is designed to provide an incentive for every metric ton of reduction that we're able to verify on farm. And the deliverable at the end of the value chain is true systemic change to the supply chain that is long-lasting and provides a long-term way for the end of the value chain to really solidify their relationships with each step in that value chain, from the producer to the co-op on the dairy side, or the packer on the beef side, and then to the processors, and ultimately to CPGs, retailers, and food service providers. And we were pleased to be involved in this discussion. We're practitioners here. We started the company 3 years ago, and I'm pleased to be able to share with this group that a lot of times we deal in theory and what really makes the most sense. Our job is to be where the rubber meets the road. And over the last 5 months, we've paid out more than $5 million to farmers for practice changes. And over the next 3 months, we'll pay an additional $10 million to farmers. And I think this group uniquely understands how powerful that is. But it's really thanks to those companies at the end of the value chain that are making these bets and doing it in a way that is credible and reliable. So thank you.